The personal connection.
The personal connection.
The personal connection.
The Personal Connection Podcast, the show where we explore the importance of the personal connection and how this translates into business. Discussing the topic with leading professionals to help you unlock the reach your company can have. The Personal Connection Podcast, brought to you by Emotive. One chance to interrupt, make it count. Imagery that instantly connects. So today on the Personal Connection Podcast, it's something a little bit different. We're moving away from design and brand and marketing in a way, and coming back to what the core purpose of the Personal Connection is about. That is people. Now, today's guest, Adam, I had the pleasure of meeting in an online meeting. Which, of course, if we weren't all moving to these Zoom meetings, we probably wouldn't have actually met face-to-face sort of thing. But what he offers through 119 Society is something totally unique and a really interesting perspective. And as soon as we got talking, I knew I had to bring him onto the podcast. So, Adam, the founder of 119 Society, it's damn good to have you on the show, mate. And tell people what it is you do and why everything should be people-centric, because that is your gospel.
Well, Stuart, thanks for having me, first of all, and thanks for that incredible introduction. I really appreciate that, mate. I'm Adam Butler. I'm founder of 119 Society. We're headquartered over in the Netherlands, actually in the east of the Netherlands, right on the border of Germany. But as you can probably hear in my accent, I'm not born Dutch. I was born in Birmingham, born and bred, grew up there most of my life, but then I've been living for the last 10 years over here. So that's kind of me and where I'm from. But with 119 Society, as you mentioned, everything that we do is around the human element. If I was to, really drill it down into the quote unquote elevator pitch, or as it were, what I do is I help people, first and foremost. It's about a personal connection. So I help people improve their business, organization, or well-being. And I do that through human-centric innovation in either their product, service, or communication. So that's in a nutshell what I do.
Mate, you're really hitting on a couple of important topic points for me there. Well-being is one of them, of course, because it's now more than ever, I think people and organizations are starting to really look at it and understand why it's so important. We can talk then so many different avenues that if you've got poor well-being, you get poor productivity and yada, yada, yada. But more than that, it matters because people matter. And if you instill that value that your people matter more than the bottom line, and lead with that, then as an organization, you're in a much better situation, aren't you?
Absolutely. I think we're in a world now, especially pre-corona, right? So if you look at the last 10 years, especially, we've been really driven towards this idea of capitalism as king. Right, that's the way the commercial world has driven us, and especially if you look at the startup markets, everyone has a dream of wearing funky sneakers and putting their feet up on the desk, sitting behind the MacBook, and brainstorming ideas with Post-it notes until they get some venture capital, which is fantastic. But I think it's kind of polluted in terms of what the dream is. This Americanized idea of the American dream, or the get rich quick, or whatever name you put to it, kind of implies that the goal of the life that we live is to make as much money as possible. And my argument is that money is simply a tool. Of course, it's a very, very powerful tool. It's a very handy tool. But it's very true what they say. It doesn't buy happiness. The only real way to find happiness is through building self-esteem and building connections with others. And that's what we're really trying to promote, is a term that I found and that I've strongly subscribed to which is Enlightened Capitalism, which is the art of doing well by doing good.
I like that. That's twisting it all around, isn't it? It's changing what has been the status quo essentially within business thinking and almost society itself, and turning it around that should be not about the bottom line. It should be about how people feel and what you actually get from it as well. I mean, yeah, as you've said it straight away there, the money is everything, but it's also, we come back to the other quote, that money's the root of all evil. And it can be, because if you lose focus of what actually matters, both personally and also as a business, you can end up in a really dangerous ground essentially for bringing the best out of your people. And I think coming back to your elevator pitch again, which I love, mate, you've really knuckled that down now. It's communication as well. We were talking about this the other day, where communication is key and it's central to everything, but you've got to talk to the people. It's not just shouting, because if you're just shouting, what's the point? You've got to communicate in a way that people understand and communicate to them in a way that they want to hear as well. It's putting everything in its right place, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think, if you look at traditional communications and marketing, it's very often that we think about communication as only as this metaphorical verbal way of communication. So shouting or speaking to your audience. But what if we were to assume that none of our audience could hear us? They could only feel us. What would our body language as a company be? What would our position be? What would our stature be? And I think when you start to think about it in that way, we've all heard it. It's not what you said, it's the way in which you said it. We've probably all heard that in arguments with family members. And it's completely true. If I tell you, if I tell you that I love to build brands and I do this work as a designer because that's what I was born to do. And then I tell you, yeah, I love it. I'm a designer. That's what I was always doing anyway. So I'm just keep going. Essentially, the words in the two statements that I've said are not too different, but the way in which you say it and the way you form it and the energy you put behind it is much more powerful.
Totally. But then if you spin it the other way as well and turn that whole pitch around and say what you do for that end person, that's where the power is, isn't it? It's if you go in and you empower them, you solve a problem, you take away their pain and their whatever it is that they're struggling with, and you produce something that takes them away from that and takes them on a new journey, then you've absolutely nailed it, haven't you? And then that's your communication marketing and everything, because it's about the person, not about what you do.
Absolutely. We've been taught as marketeers and as entrepreneurs about the idea of B2B communication or B2C communication. But to be perfectly honest with you, Stuart, I think it's all a load of crap. To put it very bluntly, because essentially all it is a message from one person or one group of people to another person or another group of people. Every sort of marketing and communication isn't B2B or B2C, it's P2P communication. That's person-to-person communication. And that's why I never communicate as 119 Society. I always communicate as Adam from 119 Society, because it's vitally important that people understand that I'm a person. I have my own motives and my own belief systems, which creates a part of what 119 as a collective is. And when people connect to the collected values, they understand my individual values, but they also recognize that there's space within the organization to bring in their own opinions and to communicate around those points as well. It's all about connecting to a person.
It's an interesting point, and it actually ties back into my previous podcast interview when we were talking all about brand and communication and talking about this evolving world that we're in now as well. And something that came up that was really quite interesting from my chat with Sam was there could be this whole thing now that companies don't have a centralized office where everyone's working, and we're all remote working in this new world that we're finding ourselves in. Companies are realizing that this is a possibility. But if you haven't got everyone completely on board and completely living your company values and company message, then you start to dilute the brand. And it's so important then that you drum in those core values and you make sure that whatever is the backbone of the company, the backbone of the brand and the message is lived and breathed by everyone, because you can't control every touch point, can you? And if you've got to really, really focus on that.
Well, I actually think that in itself is sometimes part of the problem. So believing that you as a founder or a CEO are responsible for the totalized vision of your organization, I actually find a little bit arrogant. I think when you, as you said, so people not connecting to the vision or to the structure of a company, I think it's actually turning it on its head. It's making sure that you as an organization are open-minded enough to the thoughts and positions of your employees, to build a collective vision and a collective company. I think the word company is a very, very interesting one. I spent a lot of my childhood in the theatre, working on stage, doing various musicals and pantomimes and different things. And what I realized very quickly was a company in the theatre sense is no more about the actors than it is about the musicians in the pit, than the lighting guys up in the rigs, the spot operators at the back of the auditorium, the stage manager off to one side. It's equally about every one of them and about none of them, because without every single one of them, the operation wouldn't work. And we think that the show can't go on without your star actor, but actually, those are the ones that have the understudies. So should they drop out, then there is a replacement for them. But very rarely you see a replacement for your stage manager or a replacement for your whatever it might be. So that really got me thinking about the word company, and when I put a corporate sense to that word as well. And I started to realize that there was, these kind of hierarchies of C-level management, and reporting to them are middle management, and then you have your operation floor. What I realized was the way that traditional economics teaches us to think about these companies. It's completely wrong, because it implies that the most important people are your C-level professionals at the top of the pyramid. But I guarantee you'd struggle a lot more if you had none of your sales force or your service desk or your operations desk running the daily show. And I think that is quite often one of the biggest downfalls within companies traditionally. And luckily, it's something that we're seeing change more and more as the years go on. But traditionally, one of the biggest problems is the lack of willingness from C-level or middle management to listen to other people in the organization.
Totally. And it brings back to that whole thought as well, that management and leadership is a totally different thing. The two terms get thrown together, but you've got to really communicate, and you've got to understand that it's the people on the floor that matter as much, if not more, than the people on the top, because the people on the top are nothing if you take the foundations away. And you've got to turn it around and make sure that everything that you do as a company or as a corporation is about everyone, and it's all inclusive. And it is, to pick up on your terms, it's a human-centric point, and everything comes from the people. And I guess as a corporation, you can go in there, and whether it's an SME company or literally even a global brand, by changing their thinking and by challenging their thinking, essentially, that's what it's about. You stirring things up and trying to flip things on its head a little bit. You then bring a much deeper understanding of what a company can do for its people, and then from there you can get honest and open and trustworthy communication.
Yeah, well, you've said two very important words from my own vocabulary there. which are manager and leader. And this goes more into the semantics and the language of the two words. But a manager, by definition, is someone that manages, and a leader is someone that leads. And one of the things that we really try to do with 119 as well is to get managers to become leaders. We say typically that a manager stands behind and hides behind their people, but the leader stands at the spearhead. And understanding that everyone is with you and moving in the same direction. It all comes back to this same thing. It's all about humanity. It's all about the people, right? So if you look at the situation we're in now with the coronavirus, we're a couple of weeks ahead of the UK over here in terms of people getting back to the offices and those sort of things. And this is becoming a real issue because when people start returning to the office, they of course have a new set of worries around health and safety. Am I going to be able to work in a safe environment 2 meters away from the rest of my team? But at the same time, how has it impacted the social aspect? How has it impacted job security? The economics of the company. Is the company as secure? And the only way to really tackle this and ensure that your staff and your employees and your team are with you is to act as a leader. And leaders need to use tools of communication to make sure that they're very open and very clear with the team about what actually is going on.
So, listening now, if we've got someone who is a leader in their company or they're an owner of a company, what can they actually do to bring about this sort of change and make sure that they are on the right path, essentially? What can they do? I mean, even working with a company like 119, what is it that you can do as a corporation to go in and help to steer them in the right direction?
So essentially, we when it comes to this topic in particular, one of the things that we encourage companies to do, and we're working with a number of companies at the moment with, is introducing what we call a human-first protocol, which is a way of looking at crisis or disrupt or conflict within a company, and how can we use a human-first approach to make sure that your staff, your team, are as comfortable as possible through any transition that might need to take place. And this all stems from, again, communication, making sure that your communication around the problem is human-centric. So not a case of you're all having to go on furlough, period, but looking at it more as we understand that everyone has a mortgage. We understand that these are the problems that you are facing as a person, not as an employee, but as a person. And we're here to support you. The best way for us to do that and ensure that everyone remains safe is, and of course I'm talking hypothetically there. So communication is the first key. The next key is looking at your service or your product. And this is, these are two terms that we often hear about as something that you produce as a company, right? You produce a service or a product, and this is what you sell to your customers. But equally, you have a service and a product that you provide to your employees. So how can you make sure that the service you provide and the product you provide to your employees is also following a human-first protocol? So, for example, is it better to make sure that the desks are further away from each other than putting these plastic zoo enclosures around every desk? What feels more human? And speak to your team. Don't make an executive decision, in air quotes, a term that also a very conflicting thing. Speak to your team, speak to them, think about how can we get through this together? How can we find the best solution together? And these are the sort of things that we at 119 are really, really enthusiastic to talk to people about. How can we make the product and the service that you provide to both your employees, but also to your customers, a more human-centric innovation?
Totally. And the other point there is coming back to another one of your sort of phrases, is the fact that the communication is about listening. You've got to listen to everyone, all your touch points, and get that feedback and then take it on board. You've already said it, that's a leader or a CEO, whatever, if they think they know everything, they're wrong, because it's not about them, it's about the body in its entirety. I guess if you think about a company being like a human body, you've got so many little parts that have all got to work together. And if you have one little problem in any of it, then it's going to sour the whole fruit, isn't it? So you've got to make sure that everyone's on the same direction and you're putting things in place for the right reasons.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question, Stuart. Have you ever had it, and I'm sure that you have you ever had it that you felt, maybe a twinge in your back or something physical on your body, or something somewhat medical, and you've Googled it, and instantly within 5 minutes you've realized that you've only got 2 weeks left to live and it's the worst thing in the world?
What person hasn't, mate? What person hasn't?
Right. So your first instinct is, oh my God, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. But your logic tells you I should go to the doctor, right, and actually find out what the problem is. Too many leaders are Googling their symptoms and over diagnosing their problems, when all it takes is to go down onto the work floor and ask people what's going on, right? Go and speak to your doctors. They're down there. Get in touch with them, have a communication with them, have a conversation with them, and listen, right? You can't possibly know the answer if you haven't listened to the question first. And it's so important. We're taught it as kids. It's human nature, right? We get taught to listen properly. So how can we possibly be forgetting it when we get into our adult life?
Totally. And it comes back to a phrase that I use a lot when I'm coaching anyone talking about interviews and things. That classic phrase, active listening. You've got to be engaged. You've got to be in the moment. And it's that same thing. There's no good going and asking for feedback from your staff floor if you're not actually going to take it on board and do something about it. Whether you're going to do that yourself or you're going to bring in an external agency to help you bring about that change doesn't really matter. What matters is you actually are engaged fully, because otherwise there's no point doing it.
Exactly. And what the trick of it is, Stuart, that the tools and the tricks that we use at 119 Society to help people get their organizations or their companies or their well-being on track are exactly the same tools, the same tricks that we use to help sales teams, to help marketing teams, to help product teams to create a product, an offering, a communication that connects to an audience better. Because again, whether it's an internal communication or an external communication, it's all person-to-person communications.
Absolutely. And that's why I always say when we're going in and creating the photos and the video as well for companies and explaining to them why it matters to do it, it's because you need to break down those barriers and you need to put that actual connection in place so that people can realize that they are talking to people. We're so quick to fire off an email these days and not think about it, rather than picking up the phone and actually having proper communication. And that's the point, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's also about knowing what your service is and what your value is. So if we look at a photographer, for example, if there's a photographer that's going to do a wedding, for example, right? And again, preaching to the choir a little bit here.
Yeah, of course, mate. Of course.
But a photographer that goes to a wedding, right? On the surface, what a photographer provides is a photo book or probably a memory stick these days.
Yeah.
full of images and maybe videos of a wedding, right? That's what it says on the tin. But actually, that's just the surface layer of it. That's the service. But what you provide is an everlasting memory of what is the greatest day of someone's life, right? And when you think about the value that's in that, rather than a book of photos, it becomes completely different. And that's all because you've humanized the service and the product that you create. And this all goes through from your product to your communications. So when communicating, you don't generate as much value when you say, we'll provide you a book of photos, of 30 photos for X pounds, including VAT, right? That's a very sterile way of putting it. But if you were to communicate in your first talk or in an online advert, we are dedicated as a photography team to make sure that you've got an everlasting memory of what we promise will be the greatest day of your life. It's completely different because it's human, it's emotion, it's not logic. And that's the trick of it.
Yeah, totally. And the great thing as well there, from a marketing and sales point of view, the conversation then is never about price. It never comes back to price. It's all about value. And they're almost trying to talk themselves like, why would we even not go this way? Because you've sold into them. You've sold in on feelings. You've tapped into those emotions. And as a species, we are all about stories and emotions. And if you can be very, very sensible in the words you use and the way you say things, and put that person, the intended customer, in your story, then they will naturally become part of the story. And straight away then they've bought into you and your message. And it doesn't matter whether it's a one-man band as a wedding photographer, or whether it's Nike. You've got to, every single communication you put out there is to one person. There's no good talking to the masses. If you talk to the masses, you're talking to no one. You've got to talk about the changes you're going to make to an individual. And that's where it becomes incredibly powerful. I mean, Nike years ago, when some of their adverts, when they launched them, I mean, I've got an advert in my mind. It's actually from the Mel Gibson film, What Women Want. But it was that whole thing of understanding as marketing what communication is actually about. And it's tapping into emotion, solving problems. And then suddenly, boom, you've got people eating out your hands. It's as simple as that. But you've got to do it for the right reasons. You've got to do it right.
Exactly. And actually that film is a brilliant example of, in that case, what women want. But it's a real demonstration of understanding what people want. And I love the brand Nike as well. And if you get the opportunity, I strongly recommend reading the book Shoe Boss, or Shoe Dog, I believe it's called. Okay. Which is the biography of the founder of Nike. And so if you look back at when the company had originally started, they'd gone through certain turmoil as resellers of different brands, and then they created their own brand of Nike. And it was at that point that they really got the opportunity to think about what this brand and what this product really means. And they didn't think about it as technically the best shoe, even though they had really some massive technical advancements at the time in the shoes themselves, in the sole of the shoes. What they thought about was what it did for their target audience. So their primary way of selling was going to meetups for track and field runners and saying, you've got to try out these shoes. When they created their first basketball shoe, it's exactly what they did. They had all of their field sales guys going out to college basketball games and saying, trust me, these are the shoes that you need. And you still, till today, see that in their branding, in their marketing and communications. It can all be summed up. It's about giving you the tools, giving you the shoes or the shirt or the shorts to be the best possible athlete you can be, all that you have to do is just do it.
Simple. And that's the point. They've totally embraced it. And seeing a company like that do it, anyone can do it. That's any size corporation can do. You've just got to understand why you're doing it and really tap into that message, dive into those emotions. And I pretty much mention it in every conversation when I get talking about this. There's a book called The Story Brand by Donald Miller. It's absolutely brilliant because what it does is it talks about this whole journey and puts people in that situation. So whenever I'm crafting a promotional film for a company, I will take them through the whole journey and we will have to fill in that journey. And if we can't fill in that journey, we won't get the emotions about it. You can think about an estate agent, for instance. Every estate agent is pretty much the same. They will advertise your house. These days, they'll all put them on Rightmove and in the UK, and that's it. It will just go to market. So if you're trying to attract people to them, you've got to hit them in a different way. You've got to hit them on an emotional level so that they will buy into you and you become the hero that is going to take away all this worry and all this stress and just do it. And coming back to Nike's phrase. And it's that whole point. But I guess that's where great marketing agencies come in, isn't it? And we've both worked in advertising and marketing in different ways and understand that point. But it's trying to make sure that you carry that through not just your customer facing side of communications. It is ensuring that you keep it on the staff side as well, isn't it? And on your internal side, and make sure that those values that you portray are the values that you live as a corporation.
Well, I completely subscribe to that. And actually, I would argue that it's not just about the communication. It's about, again, your service and product as well. To pull it back to Nike, yes, they communicate the liberation that their products give you, but they also have the product to do that, right? It's not a marketing gimmick. And as you said, we've both been in the industry long enough to see those going around, right? It's not good enough to just do this in your marketing and communications, because if your product itself doesn't connect to an audience on a human level, then it's a waste of time as well. So yes, it's equally as important to communicate in a very human way and connect to them on an emotional level. But you need to make sure that your product itself does that as well. Your product should speak for itself. And again, this is equally as important internally and externally. So the product that you provide to your customer is no more important than the product you provide to your employees, to your team. That's the value. The value, whatever is at your core as a person that you bring to the organization, what the collective value is of the organization, should shine through all of your communications and through the products that you put out.
Totally, mate. Totally. I mean, that's going to bring me now right onto essentially a sales pitch, because I love the way that you approach things as a company. I love your values as the corporation and what you were trying to do. And it was when we were talking and you were talking about the one day to change the business and all the different steps to that. I mean, I don't want to run through it all in complete detail, but essentially in those sort of one day programs, what is it you do go in and break down for a company? What does it work?
So first of all, people need to, in almost an AA sort of way, people need to acknowledge that there's space for change, right? So if you have listened to this podcast and have thought, okay, well, this resonates with me in some way or another, then, these are the people that I'm really, really anxious to get in touch with, because the changes that we can make to your organization and your mindset and the mindset of your staff and of your customers in relation to your product, in relation to your services, is phenomenal. And we can do this in a day. We start this off with a one-day masterclass that will bring you from the point you are now and take the objectives and the challenges that you're facing, and will humanize those and create a roadmap for human-centric innovation throughout your communications, throughout your products, and throughout your services, regardless of whether this is selling to your customers or getting engagement from your staff and from your team.
Brilliant, mate. I mean, your agenda sort of says it all, doesn't it? It's all about stimulating action. And you've got to start with that with one person. But you've got to get
absolutely.
every person buying into it. Because if you don't buy in as an individual, whoever you are in the company, then it starts to fall apart, doesn't it? If you really want to get change, you've got to get buy-in. And that's where you can then head down the whole journey, essentially, to really bring about change.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, we as 119 at the start of our journey created something called the 119 Agenda, which is our moral compass as a company. So we really believe that there's a need for us to all actively try and improve the society that we live in, starting with the human element. Which we believe is the 119th element on the periodic table. There's currently 118, of course. And the agenda essentially comes down to 5 key points. And under each of these 5 points are action areas that we believe if we can improve on all of these areas as an organization, then we will have left an active improvement on the society that we find ourselves in. And think about how this might influence your way of working, your own well-being, your home life. And if you have any questions, please get in touch with us so we can start sharing stories.
Love it, mate. And that's the point, isn't it? Sharing stories, all coming together. There's no wrong answer. It's about trying and testing and changing things, moving things around to essentially make everything a better place. You think back of the great innovations that we've had in the last century, how much we've moved on, and just think how that's going to accelerate and move forward now, whether it's moving into spaces that adapt for daytime and work living in the same 4 walls, or whether it's what new technology is going to become available to us. It's ensure that we do embrace that change and get excited about it and get behind the youth, because they're the ones who are going to be driving it. They're the ones who've got everything connected. We grew up not having smartphones. We grew up not having the internet. And then now you say that to kids in high school now and they're like, what? No internet? Like it's the first thing that on their agenda that they must have Wi-Fi. And it's sort of thinking about how as a society now, everything's connected. Everywhere you look, everything that we do as businesses and as people, it's all connected, and you've got to find ways to embrace that and get excited about the possibilities of the future. But don't forget that human connection. Don't forget to make those personal connections and possibly even make more of an effort to make them, I guess. Because if we've got more technology in the way, we're feeling it obviously at the moment that we can't see our loved ones. We can't embrace our loved ones. We can't shake hands when we go into a meeting with someone. We've got that separation. And if we're going to move to a more connected world that's more not face-to-face, more online, we've got to be really innovative about how we get those connections and make that human contact.
Absolutely. And human contact isn't about necessarily sharing a room and shaking a hand or giving a hug, even though all of these things are fantastic things. It's much more about making an emotional connection. So I think the real thing, indeed, as you said, we're in a much more connected world. But what that does for us is it offers us way more tools to share our stories. I mean, as you started the call with today, we would never have come in contact had it not been for the world being how it is at the moment. And if Zoom didn't exist, we never would have been able to share our stories. I mean, never's a big word, but it's highly unlikely that it would have happened. And I think this is the thing that's is maybe almost most important to remember is when we get to the end of this whole crazy life thing, we're not going to be each of us lying on our deathbeds counting the pounds that we got in the bank and thinking, oh, I wish I'd got more, or I'm so happy that I'm surrounded by all my £50 notes. It's ridiculous, almost comical hearing that. What matters is I'm so happy that I've managed to touch so many people's lives in the way that I have. I'm so happy to be leaving behind a fantastic family or a legacy, and the stories that I've created throughout my life, however long or short that might be. If you go out and you set out to make money, then eventually you'll make money. But the real challenge is to make impact. And if you set out to make impact, then chances are you will. It's all about focus. Money is equally as important as any other tool. We can't operate without internet. You can't travel without a bus or a train or a car. You can't operate a business without money, but it shouldn't be leading. And again, I come back to the term enlightened capitalism. How can you do well by doing good?
Totally. And I think if the whole world in one way or another, the world's suddenly being united by this pandemic, but if the world could take that unification as well and use it for good and make sure that the changes that we put in place and the values that we put in place were along those lines, the world would be a much better place. And let's hope that we can start to move in that sort of direction.
Absolutely.
But of course, it happens one change at a time, one person at a time. So I'm glad that we met, mate, because we're on the same wavelength anyway. But I want to broadcast the way that you think about things as a person and as a company. And if that can help others make a small change in their lives and to the lives around them, then it's got to be a good thing.
Absolutely. And once again, we're really, really enthusiastic to get in touch with people that have resonated with the things that we've been talking about today. If you see an opportunity in your organization to take a more human-centric approach, a human-driven protocol to create change and innovation in your company, then please, please, please get in touch with us. As you said, it's one person at a time, it's one organization at a time, but it's one story at a time. If we can start telling a different kind of story, that's how we're going to change the society that we live in.
Absolutely, mate. And the thing is, it doesn't matter where people are in the world either. As we've already said, we're more connected than ever with meeting by Zoom, whatever. There's no physical barriers anymore. So wherever you are, whatever you want to do, just jump on it. There's no excuse, essentially.
Yeah, our doors might be closed, but the world has never been more open.
Love it. What a line to finish on. Adam, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. And I know that some of the things that we've talked about, if nothing else, will have got people thinking. And surely that's what it's all about.
Stuart, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
What an episode. Adam, I hope you're listening, mate. It was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. And from when we first started talking, I knew that we were approaching things from the same authentic place. So I couldn't wait to bring you to the listeners. So thanks again, mate. And if you do want to find out more about 119 and understand their 5-point agenda that their whole ethos is built around, then head over to the website. It's 119society.com. And you'll get to understand why they build things the way that they do, leading everything from humanity. Humanity comes first. And it's all then about understanding that together we are stronger. Together we can make change. But it's important that we make sure that we look at the past, understand what happened and why it happened, and understand how we can build on that rather than knocking it down. When we've understood that, we can build for tomorrow. We can get excited about technology. We can get excited about the innovators of the world and bring something special to what we're offering to our customers, to our staff, to society in general. Let's bring about change. Let's make everything the way it should be. Let's make everything all about people. Let's make sure we're making that personal connection. And let's embrace the different, whether it's the innovators, whether it's different parts of society. We are all one species. We are all one world, one community, essentially. And if we can all change in a small way, it's got to be a good thing. It's been Stuart James with the Personal Connection Podcast, brought to you by Emotive Eye. You got one chance to connect.